Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Imperial Lates Online, Food for Thought, the latest in our public event series exploring research at Imperial College London. My name is Kate Whiten. I'm the Research Media Manager for Imperial's Faculty of Medicine. The final Lates Online week of 2020 sees a whole week-long programme of events on the future of food and the current state of nutrition and dietary science. In various ways, we'll be exploring how research is influencing and informing what we eat today and what we should be eating in the future. Tonight, we're going to be looking at one of the major trends in public eating habits in the UK over the past decade, namely the growing popularity of vegetarian and vegan diets. This is even reflected in changing restaurant menus, such as the notorious Greggs vegan sausage roll. Now, for many people, there'll be ethical and animal welfare reasons for deciding to switch to a reduced meat or no meat diet. However, we're increasingly hearing of the personal health and wider environmental benefits of cutting down or cutting out meat. The planet cannot support billions of meat eaters, said Sir David Attenborough in his recent Netflix documentary, A Life on Our Planet. But what does science actually say about the benefits of vegetarianism and veganism? How can we make more responsible and healthy decisions about what we eat? And what's the science behind it? And also, can we do this without compromising our enjoyment of food? So tonight, this is what we're going to be addressing, drawing on expertise from climate and dietary sciences, as well as culinary arts. And if your New Year's resolution might be to cut down meat, hopefully you'll find the next hour very useful. So before we introduce our speakers, I'd like to remind everyone watching at home that this is an interactive event. So please do add your questions and thoughts about plant-based diets. My colleagues are working away in the background, monitoring the YouTube chat, and they'll be passing questions to me to put to our guests. And could I just ask everyone out there to be considerate of others when posting? We want to create a welcoming space for this online conversation. So while we love passion and enthusiasm, let's avoid anything that may disrupt the experience for others. So without further ado, I will hand over to our fantastic panel this evening to say a few words about themselves. This evening we have Igor Dagbasi, Qinghee Huang, and Pietro Salvi. And if I could go to you first, Igor, to say a few words about yourself.
Hi, Kate. Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm very excited. So my name is Igor. I am a registered dietitian and also a final year PhD student at Imperial College. And yeah, very excited to be part of this tonight.
Thank you. Qinghee Huang.
Hi, good evening, Kate and Igor and Pietro and everyone else out there. I am Ching and I'm a chef and food writer, and so I'm really excited to be part of tonight's talk.
Fantastic, thank you. And we have Pietro.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here this evening. Good evening to everyone as well. I'm Pietro. I'm a third year climate of physics PhD researcher. I'm also the co-chair of the Vegetarian Society for the second year running at Imperial College, and I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to talk about today.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So I guess if we could kick off with the big question, and that's, does reducing our meat intake or cutting it out altogether mean benefits for the planet and also benefits for our bodies? Igor, can I come to you first on that one?
Yeah, of course, it's nerve-wracking to go first, but of course.
Thank you.
Science definitely shows that reducing meat intake or cutting it out completely reduces our risk of diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. And national surveys in this country show that we are consuming quite a big amounts of animal products, especially red meat, and processed meat consumption is above the recommended levels. Therefore, reducing these or completely cutting them out. So things like Mediterranean diets, Nordic diets, vegetarian, vegan diets, people following these diets have significantly reduced levels of cholesterol and significantly reduced levels of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, diabetes. And these are the biggest killers at the moment in the Western world. So it's actually a significant thing to consider, both for health and I'll let Pietro to talk about the environment side of things.
I think that's really insightful on the diet front. On the climate front, it's sort of unambiguous that meat has a very large impact, and it's clear that as solutions towards climate change go and things that we can do for the environment, reducing meat is one of the main things that people can do, definitely from a personal perspective, from personal actions that people can take. There's really no two ways about it. Animal products have a much higher impact than any plant-based products that we see around. So it's really interesting to be talking about this, and trying to raise awareness about this is quite key.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ching?
Well, I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian or a climate physicist, but I, just from a personal experience, my husband went plant-based, and from an experience point of view, a personal experience point of view, from someone who's suffered from asthma since he was a child, his asthma has disappeared. So, and this is, within 3 months of going on a plant-based diet, his health transformed. And so being a Chinese chef, where our philosophy and, has always been that food is medicine. And yes, this idea that food is medicine has always been challenged, even when I have been doing my research as a chef, this idea of the Chinese philosophy of balancing yin and yang. But really seeing my husband's transformation has really sort of put it in my mind, to the point where I've now written a book, and that's called Asian Green, where it's all wholly plant-based, because I just can't believe it, and we both can't believe it, how his health is completely transformed. So from a personal point of view, I truly believe that plant-based diet has the power to heal us from a healthful point of view.
That's fascinating, and fascinating to hear of your husband's experience as well. That sounds like it's been quite dramatic from that dietary shift.
Definitely, because he was diagnosed with asthma from a young, from a baby, and he's had to have preventative and has had to go to the doctors, every year. And we've been together for 18 years, and there's not been a day where, he loves exercise, he loves being outdoors, where he's not, carrying his inhaler. And every winter he suffers. So it's a huge transformation for his personal health. Now, I'm not saying that it's the case for everybody, and of course, I hope more doctors will look into this. But it's not the only example where I've heard people have transformed their health from an experience point of view by going completely plant-based. One of my doctors who's on statins has transformed their blood work as well by going plant-based just within 1 month. So that's really surprising to hear. And then somebody else has said that type 2 and type 1 diabetes, they're reversing their symptoms as well. Now, I mean, it's crazy because these are obviously first-hand experiences of some people. And I think that we need to look into this more, the power of plants.
Thank you. And Igor, can I bring you in there from the science behind this and from the dietetics point of view? What do we know about meat and our overall health?
In addition to the things that I mentioned, so for example, things like asthma, we know that losing weight helps with asthma. To my knowledge, there isn't any well-controlled, big, large-scale studies testing the effect of plant-based foods on these, as we cannot ignore stories like Ching's. We need to take these into account, but there isn't research into this at the moment. And in terms of diabetes, I think it's important to call it a remission, because a recent study is you may have seen it in the news actually, the Newcastle diet. I think a couple of years ago it was. So it involved people consuming quite low calorie meals and then a reintroduction diet, which involved people losing something around 15 kilos. So this is a bit more than 2 stones. And when people lost this amount of weight, their diabetes went into remission, which means they didn't need to use their medications anymore. But this wasn't like a plant-based diet. This was purely the effect of weight loss, I think. And the reason why we call it remission is because we know that it's possible for diabetes to come back if you put the weight on. So I think it's important to call it remission rather than reversal. But yeah.
That was fascinating. Thank you. I think we've had a comment already actually from Pamela, who asks, I thought meat consumption was falling in the UK. Do we, is it on the decline?
It is absolutely in the decline, but especially men still consume more than the recommended amount of red meat and processed meats. So women are better.
How much is that, out of interest? How much are we meant to be eating per day of red and processed meat?
There's 70 grams of red meat a day. So this is 70 grams is like a deck of size of the deck of cards. So this is the maximum recommended amount at the moment. But like, yeah, man is eating more than that.
Oh my goodness, that's really interesting. And we have a question from Maya as well, who asks, if you want to cut out meat gradually, what's the first one you should cut out? Is there one you should go for? Are all meats equal?
Oh, good question. I think you definitely cut out processed meat first, because these kind of meats are associated with increased levels of bowel cancer, etc. So I think the first type of meat to cut out is definitely processed meat. I would say followed by red meat probably, but yeah, processed meat comes much above anything else, I would say.
Interesting. And Pietro, is there any difference on the environmental impact of the different types of meat?
Absolutely. So if you're going to start with anything, I definitely say you should, from an environmental perspective, you should start with any ruminant meats. So that's beef and lamb are two of the most high impact in terms of emissions, just because of the enteric fermentation that they have. So the grass and everything they eat is very efficient at converting grass into something else, but that involves the production of a lot of methane, a lot of emissions that are really powerful greenhouse gases. So they have disproportionately higher impacts than anything else really in our diets. In fact, if you cut out all of those, you remove about half of your dietary emissions off the bat. So it's just such a big part of most people's diets. It comes from just not just red meats, but beef and lamb, basically.
Wow. And what could we substitute those with? I mean, Ching, do you have any recommendations from your cooking? What are good substitutes for people to still get, I imagine, the protein needs and the other dietary needs from that if you were to cut some of those meats out?
Yes. So we eat a lot of tofu at home. So about 3 to 4 times a week. The other times that we will have a lot of beans, lentils, pulses, grains, lots of rice. We love rice and noodles. And also you can get a lot of protein from tempeh, which is another source of soybeans, and also seitan, which it comes from wheat. So actually they also provide a lot of nutritious protein. So Igor can help step in to correct me on some figures, but in a day, my husband consumes actually more than the average amount that you need for a man in terms of protein. So I think I was reading up, like, you need 80 grams maximum, 60 to 80 grams of protein for a man, and for women about 40 to 50 grams of protein. My husband, because he loves exercise and build muscle, he consumes about sort of 150 grams a day, and he'll get about 50 to 70 grams of it from shakes, from protein shakes, and you can get vegan protein shakes. He gets about 30 grams from tofu, and then 50 grams from beans, and then about 30 grams from veg. So not many people know this, but obviously veg have, a lot of protein. Everything has a lot of protein, actually. Well, I'm going to say a lot, but quantities of protein. And then in a lot of broccoli and spinach, I think per calorie, broccoli is equal to that of eating steak. And I think spinach, from my research, again, same per calorie as eating fish, I think it is. So, a lot of vegetables, a lot of grains, they're complete proteins. It means they've got the whole essential amino acids that you need. And so this is interesting for us, because the first thing when we were going more plant-based for my husband, I mean, he wasn't worried about the taste, because I can make vegetables very tasty. But he was really worried about, actually, are we going to get enough vitamins, and where are we going to get them from? And so not just the protein, but the other side is the way to approach it. I would say, in our house, we try and have a rainbow diet. So as many colorful fruit and vegetables as possible, 50% from fruit, 50% from vegetables. We will divide that up as well to make sure that half of it is raw, eaten raw, so we're getting maximum nutrients. And then the other half, we'll lightly cook, either steam or stir fry or roast. So it's, keeping as much of the nutrients, but making it delicious as possible. But of course, we love, just like everybody, we love treats. So we will, go, and there's a lot of actually delicious foods that you can make with, like the burgers, vegan burgers. You can make your favorite fast food. You can make anything plant-based, in terms of, if you like your junk food, So we try and balance that out, because it's difficult to be very disciplined all the time. So you've got to be enjoying your food for maximum health and happiness. And so it is a balance, but it hasn't been too much of a challenge. So I think it's absolutely doable.
Wow. And Ching, do you have any top tips for making vegetables delicious?
Well, I think, spices are your best friend. So, array of spices, turmeric, ginger, Chinese 5-spice. I mean, obviously I come from an Asian perspective in terms of, my cooking, but, lots and lots that you can do. Cheekily, I'd say just buy my book.
Of course.
Well, but there's lots of lots of variety, that things that you can make, without going into too much detail here. I know, but all of you enjoy your plant-based dishes as well. So I'd love to know what floats all of you in terms of the dishes that you enjoy.
Absolutely, thank you. And can I just bring Igor back on the question on nutrients? Because I saw Lisa had brought in a question, so thank you very much for that, Lisa. And that was about recommending, how do we recommend that people transition from vegetarian to vegan without compromising on nutrients and vitamins, and how do we best educate ourselves on living a healthy vegan diet? Are there any particular nutrients that people really have to go for, Igor, really need to make sure they're not missing out on?
Yes, and on top of that list, I would say is B12, because B12 is a vitamin that we only get from animal sources. But the food industry, being aware of this, fortify quite a few foods with B12, for example. Sort of like plant milks, plant yogurts are usually fortified with B12. The yeast extract Marmite, for example, is fortified with B12. So eating a variety of these foods can provide good amounts of B12 to someone. But if someone is long-term vegans, we usually advise them to get their blood levels checked, B12 levels checked regularly. Other nutrients that come up is, especially with younger women of childbearing age, would be iron. And it's a misconception is people think you cannot get any iron from plant sources, and that's not true. There's quite a lot of iron in plants, actually. However, this is different to the type of iron we find in meat, which is called heme iron, and this is very readily, easily digested and absorbed by the body. whereas the iron from the plants is not. So we need to make sure we get a good source, and we need to make sure with our iron-containing foods such as like beans, pulses, we eat these with vitamin C-containing foods. So like maybe have a glass of orange juice with your meals, and make sure that you don't have any sort of tea or coffee before and after meals, because this can reduce the absorption of iron as well. Quite a few vitamins to mention. I don't want to take the whole time, but another one that comes up, which is sometimes actually ignored, is iodine, because the main source of iodine in diet, in the English diet especially, is milk. And unlike calcium, vitamin D, and B12, which is highly fortified in vegan food alternatives, iodine is not supplemented, fortified in these foods. There's only 2 brands that supplemented in their plant milks, so it's worth for people to check and find these brands. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention any brand names, so I'm not gonna. But basically, there's only 2, so it may be worth looking for those as well. And overall, I want to say that sometimes people again have the misconception that, oh, if I go vegan, I will have a nutritional deficiency. And no, that's not the case. We're just brought up in like a meat-eating society and family. So it's like changing a habit, learning a new habit. So it needs to be planned a little bit. And it definitely doesn't hurt consulting a dietitian, a nutritionist, and planning your diet a little bit, making sure you get all the nutrients. And once you get the hang of it, then you're good to go, sort of thing. You don't need to constantly check things other than sometimes your blood levels. But I think it's worth mentioning that it's a new habit that you need to get used to. So don't give up. Yeah, and actually the protein thing that you mentioned as well, Cheng. Another misconception is people think they're not going to get enough protein from plant sources at all. And especially I get this question asked a lot by men. They go, oh, I'm going to lose all my muscle. I won't have any protein in my diet. And sometimes people worry to eat a lot of soya products thinking that, oh, apparently there's something in soya that estrogen like, so it will make me more like a woman. I want to say these are not true. And you actually do get quite a good source of protein from plant foods as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jane.
To add to Igor's, I agree with you, Igor. It's, my husband is, I'm not showing off, but he is ripped. So he's able to build his muscle from, from eating a lot of fruit and vegetables and protein and plant protein. So I agree with you 100%. About iodine, we actually have a lot of seaweed in our household. So nori and different wakame seaweed. And I was researching, and it's true that seaweed has a lot of iodine.
Yeah, it is true.
And when we were doing our research, it just strikes, it's crazy where, obviously Pietro talked about the cows getting the obviously mainly eating grains and grass, and and look how strong they are, and how built they are, and actually the fish get all their omega from algae and seaweed, and it seems inefficient. If they are able to do it, why don't we just go directly to source and eat
absolutely. The iodine thing, so because you mentioned seaweed, I feel like I have to say it. So you're not recommended to eat like more than 1 portion of seaweed in a week, because there's it's a very, very dense source of iodine. Mm-hmm. So you may actually overdose yourself if you eat it quite a lot. So the current guidelines in England say eat it once a week. I think that too.
That's good to know. We might have it more than that a week, but
Thank you so much, Igor and Ching. We've had a question through from Lara, who's asking about the environmental impact of plant-based meat substitutes. Lara says she's vegetarian herself, and this is really interesting because obviously these are hugely popular at the moment. The number of meat, I think you were talking about, Ching, burgers and steaks and fried chicken. I think you can get vegan fried chicken. So can I come to you, Pietro, to ask about the environmental impact of those products?
Of course. Now, it goes without saying that the more processed the food is, the more of an environmental impact it's likely to have.
Okay.
Whether that's from processing just involving a lot of energy for cooking and turning things into powders and reconstituting them and forming them into whatever. You get a lot of transport involved, so you might have various ingredients shipped between facilities, one place for processing in one place and then processed in another place, and then all sorts of supply chain issues that just build up and up in terms of energy usage and make that product less environmentally friendly. But the key thing to think about there is that when you're looking at some burgers, whatever, they're made of pea protein and wheat gluten. It's less environmentally friendly to have that burger in that form in whatever plastic packaging delivered to your supermarket than it is to eat the peas and the wheat that goes into that. But you'll notice this if you look at any of these brands, they actually generally pride themselves and they'll show you how much less environmentally impactful they are compared to beef burgers or any other meat products. So it's more of a spectrum on plant-based foods. You can get more and less impactful plant-based foods, but universally, they're still generally much, much less impactful than meat products. So they're not ideal as far as environmental impacts goes, and you can undo quite a bit of what you've done going to a plant-based diet, but it's still almost always better for the environment through water usage, energy usage, emissions, all of that, than the meat alternatives, than the meats themselves rather than the alternatives.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So it's better to go for, say, one of those beetroot, as you said, pea-based burgers than a actual burger from cows, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. That's fascinating. Thank you. And that's going to come to Igor on that point as well. Pietro made about the processing. So, I mean, do you know how they sit in the health stakes? These the kind of the alternatives, which are, I guess, as we said, usually pea protein based.
They're not always pea protein. Some of them are like soy protein based. There's we see a huge variety at the moment in the supermarkets, which we didn't see a couple of years ago. And I'm fully amazed by it, like the variety that we have at the moment. And again, because of that variety, I have to divide it a little bit and say some of these meat substitutes are actually as bad as the meat alternatives because they're quite high in saturated fat. They have quite a lot of salt in them. They don't have a lot of fibers. So they're actually as bad as the meat alternatives that they're replacing. But there are also some alternatives. So one of them that I like to mention is the mycoprotein, which is sold under the name corn in this country. So, for example, corn is low in saturated fat. So saturated fat is what increases our bad cholesterol. So that's associated with the cardiovascular disease risk and everything. So corn is low in saturated fat and high in fiber and high in protein. So there are some alternatives that are healthier, but we need to be careful that just because something is vegetarian doesn't equally mean that it's automatically healthier. So that would be one of the biggest messages I like to give tonight, I think. And again, because someone is following a vegan and vegetarian diet nowadays doesn't mean that they're automatically following a healthier diet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I've just seen we've had another question through from Pamela, which is related to that, who says she really likes the idea of plant-based foods, but will protein from veg, so just protein from veg, keep someone full enough compared to meat? So will it keep us feeling as full as a meat dish would?
Oh yeah, it should. If anything, it should keep you fuller to an extent, because the amount of protein that we will get, for example, from chickpeas, beans, pulses, these would come along with a lot of fiber as well. And these food products also, these foods also have really rigid food structures, which is actually what we're investigating at Imperial in our group. So these rigid food structures mean that they're not very easily digested in the body. And because they're not very easily easily digested, they leave our small intestine and reach to the large intestine, where they meet with our gut bacteria and they feed our gut bacteria as well. And the chemicals the gut bacteria produce feeding on these foods has been shown to stimulate the release of appetite reducing hormones in the body. So the question to that is definitely yes.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I'm sorry, Pietro, I'll go straight to you.
Sorry, I just want to ask about this because I have read that in terms of fiber as well, one important part of that is that people chew a lot more, and that can contribute as well to a sense of satiety. I don't know if you'll have read the same things there.
Yeah, the oral processing of food can contribute, because if you chew food a lot more, obviously you are disturbing that food structure more. But to be honest with you, I don't think there's a lot of studies out there looking at this, like the kind of damage that the food processing would do compared to chewing. I think is a little bit more.
Okay, good to know.
That's fascinating. Oh, sorry, Ching, I go to you.
I thought I'd just contribute to this one point because I love this point. And from an Asian perspective, you know, in our Chinese philosophy, we say, you know, food should be lightly cooked or steamed. And obviously, we have our naughty dishes, you know, where we deep fry, etc. But it's really that we should enjoy the ben wei, the original flavor of the food. So if it's a carrot, the way you cook it, just lightly cook it to bring out its flavor, so that you're getting maximum nutrition, but also maximum enjoyment, you know, of that ingredient. So, so yes, I mean, really lightly cooked, and I think it's going back to simplicity, isn't it? Freshness and simplicity. We don't really need things out of a packet. An apple is an apple, a cucumber is a cucumber. We can do delicious things with beetroot, like the lovely beetroot burger. So, so there's, I mean, you can have those naughty plant-based foods occasionally, you know, if you're a little bit feeling, oh, I don't want to cook X, Y, Z from scratch. But most of the time, from a cook's perspective, when you're cooking from scratch, you're going to get the maximum benefits, I think.
That's fantastic.
And I think, building up on that point as well, I think we're seeing like a simultaneous increase in the consumption of highly processed foods and the incidence of obesity and all these diseases that I mentioned. So this is something that we cannot overlook, I think, and we need to promote the consumption of mostly fresh, minimally processed foods. And one thing you said is key there as well, that those high fat, high sugar foods are still okay to consume. We're not going to not have a birthday cake on a birthday. We're not going to not celebrate Christmas. But I think it needs to be occasional, and it needs to, the rest of our diets should come from minimally processed foods, I think.
That's fascinating. Thank you. So if we do have a diet high in processed food, am I right in thinking that because it's processed, it doesn't get to that bit of our guts that then sends those signals to say we're full? So you could maybe eat more. I don't know if that's correct.
I mean, yeah, actually, wow, well done. So yeah, well, that's partly it actually. But also these foods tend to be quite energy dense, and by that I mean they have quite a lot of calories, they have quite a lot of fat, they have quite a lot of sugar, salt. So it's actually quite easy to overconsume these things, because like they're smaller. If you think about it, for you to eat that amount of calories from a plant-based meal, you'll have to have 3-4 platefuls of meal, which would be more difficult. But when you're eating something that's more energy dense, it's much more easier to consume, overconsume this. And a recent study showed when people are given food and say eat as much as you like until you're comfortably full, people on average consume 500 more calories in a day from processed, ultra processed foods compared to minimally processed foods. And 500 calories is like a Big Mac burger. So like if you eat one more of that every day, imagine how that's going to impact on your body weight as well. And yeah, it is possible that this is also because these foods are not keeping us full for longer.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And Pietro, can I just bring you in on talking about fresh fruit and fresh produce in terms of the environmental impact? Is it always better to eat fresh fruit and vegetable than, say, frozen, or I guess there's fresh and there's also the local argument. So perhaps if we talk about fresh versus processed first, or canned or frozen.
So there's some very interesting points there in terms of fresh versus there's canned, there's frozen. It's all a bit of a mess, but basically what you really want to look for in terms of the most sustainable foods you can get in terms of fruits and vegetables is local and in season. Because very importantly, there are a few things that can have really high environmental impacts, and comparing them is a bit difficult in numbers. Things that are transported from far away that need to be fresh, need to be refrigerated. So that might be air freight, which is really environmentally impactful, or they'll need to be refrigerated or frozen, which is a high input of energy, which is very costly environmentally. But if they're local, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not high impact, because if you need to try and grow tomatoes in December, chances are it's going to be in a greenhouse that's heated, and a lot of energy is put into that to make it local and fresh, which it shouldn't be in December. So what you're really looking for in terms of fresh food is local and in season, which does limit you to quite, maybe not so many bananas, unfortunately, unless you can grow a banana in peak July in Somerset. But yeah.
That was great, thank you. I think there's another question for you from Trevor. Thank you for your question, Trevor. Could you say something about the impact on land use, deforestation, between meats and plants? And Trevor says he's especially thinking of soya and deforestation.
Absolutely. So not all plant-based foods are free from deforestation. There are some very, very obvious examples of that. Soy's not really one of them. Just a point on soy. We often talk about soy and the environmental impacts it has on the Amazon. But if we look at soy that humans consume, that we'd use in sort of plant-based diets, if we were using all the soy that we produce in plant-based diets, from what I can tell from the Food and Agricultural Organization, the statistics from the UN, it would provide about half of our protein requirements for the whole globe, just from soy alone. We're not doing that. We're feeding most of it to cattle. So all of that, a lot of that gets lost. So it's not really a question of, are we deforesting the Amazon for human consumption of soy? We're deforesting the Amazon to produce soy to feed to animals and various things like that. And even then, you might say soy is not a great thing, but actually, relatively, soy is actually quite environmentally friendly as a crop, because then we need to grow something else. So it's, we'd have to grow corn or barley or whatever to feed to these cattle if we want to keep that beef production. So at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with, like, the soy is really not what's responsible for that deforestation there. But there are plant-based foods, palm oil being a really big one, that is responsible for, well, I guess plantations there of palm oil are technically trees, but it's deforestation to replace with these plantations. So you do get a lot of deforestation there and a lot of problems there. Generally speaking, the deforestation that happens for meat-based products or for animal-based agriculture involves cutting down forests and turning things into pasture, or growing crops that need to be fed to animals. So it's a very inefficient process. Whereas the deforestation that happens for things like palm oil is actually a very complex issue, and I'm definitely not an expert on this to sort of discuss whether palm oil is actually good or bad. But it turns out palm oil's very efficient at what it does. So even if we're concerned about the deforestation from palm oil, we need to really consider, all the biofuels, all the saturated fats we get that are really efficiently produced by palm oil. We need to make them in some other way, and no other oil production is quite as efficient as palm oil in terms of emissions, water use, or everything. It's just clearly a big issue where it's produced for orangutans and ecology in Malaysia and Indonesia. So it's a very complex issue there that I'm probably not equipped to answer in a general climate sense.
That's a fascinating insight there. Thank you, Pietro. Ching.
Thank you, Pietro. Actually, when I was researching my book, what you touched on just now is so fascinating, because I read a statistic, and obviously there's lots of statistics around, and whether it's true or not. But if this is true, it's quite shocking that 80% of the soy produced in the Amazon is fed to animals, and only 6% is for human consumption, and that if most of that soy was given for human consumption, we would be able to feed 3.5 billion more people on the planet. Now, when I read that, I thought, gosh, wow, that is a big environmental impact. And so, you know, obviously this is from the UN, and you know, I believe, and so it is food for thought. And then, you know, obviously my friends, we have a debate, and they say, oh, Jamie's on a vegan diet, and you know, protein and all of that, and then they always say, well, soy, is that really healthy for you? And then we always say, actually, the Chinese diet for centuries has always been about soy. Without soy, we wouldn't have been able to feed so many people, you know, because obviously the soy becomes tofu, becomes soy milk, and all of these products. So, you know, to us, it's a wonder food. To us, without it, you know, if anything, the whole of the Chinese cooking world would not be without soy, because, you know, soy became miso paste in Japan, became doenjang in Korea, become soy sauce, you know, everywhere. So without this, we would be lost. So I think that's just something to share.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Ching. Thanks so much for that point. We've had another interesting point come through from Annie, and this touches on allergies. We actually had another question submitted. Thank you very much indeed about allergies. So if we go to Annie's question first, and she's saying that processed food sometimes is the only option in getting your 5 a day when you're suffering with allergies, and she was asking about how to have a plant-based diet if you have allergies or restrictions. This slightly crosses over with a question that we also had from Sharon about making vegan meals without the use of nuts or nut-based products. I know that quite a few people have sesame allergies as well. So is there anything we can speak to on that? If I come to you, Ching, first, are there any kind of the substitutes we can use without having to turn to nuts, or any way we can incorporate allergies into that plant-based diet?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what's allergies. The person from Annie.
Oh yeah, from Annie.
What allergies you have, but I suffer personally from allergies as well, in terms of sometimes a little rash, mainly from, I think, maybe sulfites. If I have a glass of wine, or maybe if I have some frozen, ice cream, or frozen dough, or sometimes nuts or dried fruit, I get a reaction, and I think, oh, and people don't really talk about that much, because it is a preservative. But I think I have a sensitivity personally too, and I think a lot of people have a sensitivity to it. And I think actually people need to maybe start talking more about it as well, about this issue, because a lot of foods are preserved in sulfites. I mean, I have a friend in Hong Kong who can't eat eggs now, because eggs are naturally sulfurous, but they preserve the animal feed, which is a mold inhibitor, with sulfites, and then when the chickens eat it, and then the eggs were sulfurous anyway, and now they have even more sulfur, and then obviously it affects them. So obviously what we put in our food system is very important, and I would suggest try and eat just whole foods. When you go to the supermarket and you want to go plant-based, and you also have allergies, just go to the fresh fruit and vegetable section and just get your main essentials from there. Even if, maybe tofu, if you have allergies because of soy or nut allergies, don't go to those aisles. Just focus completely on the fresh fruit and vegetable section. That's all you need. You don't need anything else in the super. You don't need anything from a box, anything from a, whatever. You can heal yourself and eat very healthily just from going there. In terms of nut substitutes, I mean, there, instead of nut milks, you can have oat milk. Oat is also very high in plant-based protein, and it's very good for you. And I believe it's also lower in creating, an impact on the environment. But go to the beans and pulses aisle. So all those grains, all those beautiful grains, mix them up. Make lovely, stir-fried rices or congee, dishes like that. Just keep it very, very simple, fresh and simple.
That sounds delicious. Thank you, Ching. Igor, obviously nuts are a big part of, or people think nuts are a big part of a vegan diet, but is it easy to exclude those? Can you still get what you need without looking to those sources?
Yeah, I think certain allergies and also certain conditions make following a vegetarian diet a little bit more difficult. And these include things like not only allergies, but like celiac disease, for example, or IBS. These things all make it a little bit more difficult. But again, not impossible at this stage, because there's so many products out there. It's just takes a little bit of investigating. And the oat products that you mentioned, there's also rice milks now, the rice-based yogurts. So there's quite a big variety out there. The only thing I would say to be wary of if you have nut allergy is sort of the only source of selenium in vegan diets mainly is Brazil nuts. So if you can't eat this, maybe make sure you get a supplement of selenium. And also commenting on the first part of that question about the processing. So I want to highlight that the kind of processed foods that I'm talking about are called ultra-processed foods. And these are industrial combinations of ingredients, and you usually look at their ingredients list, and it's as long as a little novel, and there's so many additives in it, etc. So I'm not talking about, for example, frozen vegetables or canned vegetables with nothing added to them almost. Frozen better than canned, because canning process sometimes may get rid of some of the water-soluble vitamins, but especially frozen fruits and vegetables are as good and sometimes even better than fresh fruits and vegetables, because if they're frozen instantly as soon as they're picked, they retain their vitamins a little bit better. So I want to highlight that when I was talking about processed foods before, it was more those ultra-processed, highly processed foods that are industrial combinations. And you're more than okay to go for frozen canned vegetables, because eating sort of those vegetables rather than anything else is going to be more beneficial for you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Igor. I just wanted to touch on something we talked about earlier. We talked about, you had that fantastic tip, Igor, about not drinking tea or coffee with meals. I hope I've remembered that correctly. I wonder if I could just come to you, Pietro, when we're talking about beverages and tea and coffee. Are there any differences in the environmental impacts of the different drinks that we consume?
So there's some very interesting things to consider there. So Igor was mentioning processed foods, and this sort of relates to that. Processed foods, in terms of ultra processed foods, often involve a lot of processes that are energy intensive. And frozen vegetables, even though you don't count them quite in the same category, also are quite energy intensive because of refrigeration and all that. Whereas tinned foods can actually be quite environmentally friendly, because you don't need any, all the transport, refrigeration, all the problems you have with that are greatly reduced. So you just need to transport this generally through much more efficient ways. Through shipping, you can transport huge bulk of tinned goods. They're not fresh. They're probably not as healthy, I'm sure Ching and Igor would say, but they can be a lot more environmentally friendly. Now, thinking of tins, we can talk about bottles, and they are actually, because they're so heavy, they actually do become quite a big problem in terms of plant-based diets. So if you removed all meats and all animal products, and you're left with only plant-based foods, which are almost always better than any animal products. There are two things that sort of stick out, and that is coffee and alcoholic beverages. Coffee sticks out because it's quite a lot of energy input. So you have to heat it up and roast it and process it and transport it from quite a long way away. and we use quite a lot of it to make a single cup of coffee. If you ever compare how much coffee you need to make a cup of coffee compared to the amount of tea you need to make a cup of tea, tea turns out to be much more environmentally friendly as an alternative. But in alcoholic drinks, they have to be fermented and heated and kept in a way. And then the amount you actually drink per calorie, or the amount you consume in an evening, even if you're being sensible, is quite large for the amount of weight that you're actually consuming. So you consume a lot of weight of product, especially including the very heavy bottles that need to be transported for just an evening of enjoyment. So they can have quite a large impact. So something to bear in mind.
Yeah, and so is tea going to be the best option there?
Well, a bit of sad news is that there are many problems with coffee production as time goes on, because it grows at high altitudes, and we're pushing it at higher and higher altitudes. I'm sure some scientists will figure out bioengineering to make it grow some other way, but there's probably going to be less coffee in the future anyway. So, in a sense, it's better for the planet, and it's probably worth getting used to tea now anyway.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That's brilliant. I just wanted to go to a question we had from someone who registered for the event, from Laura. And she also had a Christmas related question talking about Christmas cookies. She bakes a lot of Christmas cookies each year, and two problem ingredients in terms of animal products are butter and eggs. She's asked if anyone has any suggestions for what she could use instead for Christmas cookies. Shall I go to you, Ching?
So as a good egg substitute, you can use chia seeds. So just in a normal sort of cake recipe, let's say 200 grams of flour. You need basically about 5 tablespoons of chia seeds, and give them a little rinse, and then add double the amount of water, so about, let's say, 10 tablespoons of water, and then just let that sit and coagulate, and that gives it a lovely yolky kind of texture, and you're also going to get the lovely seedy bits from the chia seeds. But I mean, it is difficult, but there are also substitutes like, instead of butter, you can use cocoa butter. So that'd be lovely. It'll give a slight coconut taste, but you're still going to be able to get that creaminess. And in terms of, instead of milk, for example, use the usual plant milks. And there's also things like soy cream, which are a little bit thicker. Honestly, I mean, I'm not, baking is not my expertise, but there is an array of lots of different fabulous, vegan baking delights that you can sort of, sink your teeth into.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. In fact, I wanted, in the last few minutes, and we are quite tight on time now, perhaps I could ask you all what you're going to be tucking into on Christmas dinner on Christmas Day, now that we've reached into Christmas. Can I start with you, Igel?
I will be having a lentil bake, and yes, instead of eggs in the lentil bake, I use flax seeds. And I have a mushroom gravy, loads of veggies where possible with skin on to give more fiber, and skin on the roasted potatoes as well. That will be my Christmas meal.
Oh, that sounds delicious. Thank you. Can I go to you, Ching?
That sounds delicious. I'll come round for Christmas lunch. That sounds lovely. All of the above, and I would probably do some roast mushrooms with some chopped up different nuts, like a nut roast. But actually, I've been hosting Christmas 2 Christmases in a row, and actually my sister-in-law is tasked with it this year, so I think it'll be a surprise. So
thank you.
If I want Christmas this year, that's what I do.
Thank you so much. And Pietro?
Well, I think I'm going to a friend's house for this Christmas, lockdown allowing. And I think I think their best dishes are risotto, so not very Christmassy. But I think I'll try and contribute to make it more Christmassy. I'll try and perfect my seitan roast if I can ever get it just right. And I'll also try and make some tasty treats, probably like a cinnamon roll or something, something baked wise.
That sounds delicious. Thanks all. I've just seen one last question, which I know we've only got probably about a minute or so. Pietro, this one would be for you. It's about the environmental impact of synthesized meat, like the in vitro lab-grown meat. Do we know much about that?
So there are definitely quite a lot of claims that are being thrown around. It's all quite secretive from what I know. It's all highly competitive, and a lot of research is being done on this to try and get it perfectly done. Just on a small note, I don't personally see the point, because I've tried all the vegan products that have come out, and I think they're fantastic regardless. But I'm sure they'll get it at some point. And there's a lot of word being put out that they're really good on water use and nutrient use. In terms of energy use, from what I remember, they're very high energy use, because they have to be lab grown and controlled for weeks at a time. But that's very subject to change as the research improves. So.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, we had a very last comment in response to the question, is anyone planning a more plant-based festive season? Yes, this commenter said they're going to get 2 Christmas trees this year as a more plant-based. I don't know where we are with Christmas trees and environmental impact. I don't think we've got time to explore that one, but it's an interesting one. Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think that's almost up on time. Yeah, I think we're coming up for about 5:02, so I think that's going to have to be the last question. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much to our speakers and for everyone who's joined us for this live conversation this evening. Thank you so much for all the questions and comments. For those watching on YouTube, apologies if we were unable to get to your questions. A recording of this discussion will soon appear on the Imperial College London YouTube channel for you to watch again, share with your friends or colleagues. A link will also be posted in the chat to an evaluation form where you can tell us what you thought of the event. Please take a couple of minutes to fill this in. It's really, really useful for us to have this feedback. So if you do have time to do that, we'd be really grateful. Otherwise, it just remains for me to thank our amazing panel this evening, Igor, Ching and Pietro, and thank you for tuning in and providing some really excellent questions for discussion this evening. We hope to have provided some food for thought. So have a really good evening. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully you're still able to enjoy your Christmas dinners with everything we've learned this evening. So thank you very much. Any last thoughts from our panel before we close off for tonight?
I was just gonna say, I think I shared the link. I don't know if it will be put under the comments later. But like, there's some tips that I shared to have a healthier Christmas. It's not to say don't enjoy your Christmas. It's just the few tips that I shared. So if you have time and you're interested, make sure you have a look. And hope you enjoyed tonight. Thank you.
Thanks,
Egil. That's great. Ching, any last thoughts?
I just want to say thank you so much. It's been an honor, and thanks to you, Kate, as well, for chairing and everyone's questions. And just to wish you all a very, very good Christmas. And Veganuary is around the corner, so lots to celebrate. Lots more sort of delicious plant dishes and veggies, and hopefully everyone can get behind it this year.
Oh, of course, I forgot about is it Veganuary? Have I said that correctly?
It's like another Christmas, really, but for everyone in the plant world. So something to look forward to.
Another celebration. Oh, fantastic. And any last thoughts from you, Pietro?
Absolutely. It was great. It was great being here. Thank you so much for having me. To everyone out there, the plant-based world has become incredibly exciting in the last few years. I grew up mostly vegan when I was between the ages of 2 and 7, and that was a completely different world. It's so exciting right now with so many new books coming out and so many new things to try. You have so much to try, whether you're particularly committed or not.
Oh gosh, so perhaps worth a go in January after the Christmas binges. And that's fascinating that you grew up vegan as well, Pietro, for that amount of time.
Yeah, well, we did stop when I turned 7, so it's been a bit of back and forth.
a bit of back and forth since then. Oh, fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Oh, well, I hope you all have wonderful Christmas in your various different guises and things that you'll be eating on the day. And fantastic. Well, I might myself attempt a bit of a veganuary in January after the Christmas splurge, and see how it goes. And we'll of course be looking at your book, Ching, which I believe is out in January. Is that right?
Out in January, yeah. I'll send you all a copy. I'd love to. If you need any tips, please do call on me, Kate. You've got my number now, and all of you. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody.
Good
Thanks
luck,
again.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.